Hi, welcome on the Neuromarketing on Allegro podcast, where we explore ways to make the products you sell online among the most preferred. My name is Karolina Albanowska, and I'm the owner of Albary Marketing, a company specializing in research and training in the field of neuromarketing.
And I'm Tomasz Świętoniowski, and I've been running training sessions and consultations for business owners for many years, helping them grow their companies. I own an agency specializing in boosting sales on Allegro. Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Neuromarketing on Allegro. I'm Tomasz Świętoniowski, and I co-host this podcast with Karolina Albanowska.
Hello!
Today we are very excited to welcome a very special guest. She's one of the most recognized voices in behavioral marketing. Her book, Using Behavioral Science in Marketing, is full of insights that are practical, science-based, and easy to apply, even for sellers on platforms like Allegro or Amazon. And today, I hope she will help us explore how psychology shapes customer behavior, and how we can all improve our communication and boost our sales. Nancy Harhut, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Thomas and Carolina, for having me. It is an honor to be talking to you today.
So maybe I start with the first question. Nancy, what inspired you to connect behavioral science so directly with marketing practice? Was there a particular moment or discovery that pushed you in that direction?
So I started my career in marketing, and partway through it, somebody recommended Robert Cialdini's book, Influence, the Psychology of Persuasion. And as I read that, I began to underline and circle and make notes in the margins because the things that I was reading about were directly applicable to the client challenges that I was working on. And so I started to try out some of these behavioral science techniques in the work that I was doing for my clients, whether it was an ad or a direct mail piece or an email or a landing page. And I began to see that these tactics and these techniques were working. They were very successful. And so that got me going in the behavioral science and marketing direction, and I never looked back. I just started to study it more and more. I started to apply it more and more, and I saw that the results were good, and my clients were happy about that, and so there was really no reason not to continue in that direction.
Oh, so it sounds really good. And for example, my start with neuromarketing was when I read first time a book of Kevin Hogan or Roger Dooley. And I'm really surprised when you told that your customers was really excited and wanted to continue. Because in Poland, still people sometimes worry to use neuromarketing because things that maybe is some manipulation or not ethics, they scare because it's something new for us. But I have a question for you and about this difference, because how do the influences of values, culture, and social behaviors affect change in decision making? How can we predict which of these influences are more powerful than the instincts that govern our brains?
That's a good question. Very good question. And I want to go back just a moment and say, yes, my clients were very excited, but it was only once they saw the results that they got excited. Here in the U.S., we do still have people say, well, is it manipulation? Is it ethical? And I always say to them, it depends on how you use it. Neuroscience, neuromarketing is a tool. And if you use it ethically, responsibly, properly, for good, then it is a good thing to do. If you misuse it, if you use it unethically or irresponsibly, shame on you as the marketer. And what will happen is you may get a short-term win, but in the long term, you will erode customer trust, brand trust, and that is very hard, if not impossible, to get back. So I did want to mention that. I started to kind of quietly apply these techniques along with marketing best practices, and when the results were good, I explained to my clients why I did what I did, and then they were like, good, give me more of that. But, we do still have, people here in the U.S., as in, I think, in other countries, where they say, well, is it a good thing to do? Is it ethical? And I believe it's incumbent upon the marketer. It's the marketer's responsibility to make sure that it's used ethically. And so then I think your question was about how do we know which behavioral science principles are going to work, how they will work. Was that? I'm sorry. Could you remind me again? What?
Yes. Because we know that our instincts influence for everybody, right? But I wanted to see the difference, how the values, culture, and social behavior can influence in decision making. How is more important?
Yeah. So I think a lot of behavioral science is based on decision-making shortcuts that humans have, that we've acquired over ages and ages and ages of evolution. They're just kind of hardwired into us. And so even though people say that they're not influenced by what other people say, even though people say they make up their own mind, the truth is behavioral scientists have proven that very often there are other factors at play that do influence our decisions, even if we're not aware of them. But then as we start to delve a little deeper, look a little deeper, what we're beginning to see is that the culture that you live in and the values that you hold can influence you. So there are differences, for example, in gender. Men, for example, think that a sales price written in red is a better deal than women. Women think it's a good deal if it's written in black or in red. In certain Western countries, it's all about competition. How can I be better than the next person? How can I, show up my neighbor? How can I, I individually be the one who's really good? And then in some Eastern, more community-oriented countries or cultures, it's all about what's good for all of us. It's good for the family or for the company or for the community, and less about for the individual. There are also some differences just in terms of age. Loss aversion can be very powerful for everybody. The idea that people are twice as motivated to avoid the pain of loss as they are to achieve the pleasure of gain. But some research shows that the effect of loss aversion begins to weaken as we get older. And scientists aren't sure why, but the speculation is as we get older, we just have a more balanced viewpoint, we have better perspective, and some scientists think that we just don't want to engage with anything negative. We try to limit that because we've been through so much already that we only focus on happier things or more positive things. So these behavioral science principles are instinctive in all of us, but there are nuanced differences depending on who we are and where we are, in terms of the culture, in terms of our gender, in terms of our age. So I do believe that all of it is instinctive, but it's tempered by, as I said, who you are and where you are.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
In your book, you also highlight the importance of emotion in decision making. I completely agree, but I often hear people say, maybe others decide emotionally, but I don't. How do you respond when someone insists they are the exception?
And they do, Thomas. They insist they're the exception all the time. People say, oh, no, I know exactly why I do what I do. I make up my mind. I think through things, or my customers are in business to business, or my customers are buying a very expensive product. So they're not subject to emotion. And it can be frustrating to hear this because we know that the research supports the idea that people make decisions for emotional reasons. So what I tell people is test it. Okay, let's test a very emotional approach, and let's test a more rational approach, a more serious approach. I had a client that made business intelligence software, and the business intelligence software unlocked the data that was locked away in different data silos. So what it would do is it would allow people to have a full 360 view of their data. And without a product like that, they were making decisions based on limited data. They would have access to some of the data, most of the data, but not all of the data. And so they knew that when they were making a decision, maybe they would have made a different one if they could see all of the data. they knew that they couldn't. And so we had a product, or my client had a product that would allow them to see all of the data. So you could see how a very rational sales message could have succeeded. You have a problem. You don't see all the data. We have a solution. With our software, you can see all of the data, right? Very simple problem solution, a very straightforward benefit. And you could see how that would be good and successful and well received. But we convinced them to test that message against a more emotional one. So again, this is in a business to business environment. It was a very expensive product, and it was a decision that was being made by high-level executives. But what we did is we said, well, all right, what would that executive be feeling if they knew that they were making these very important decisions that didn't only affect them, but also the other employees at the company, maybe the standing of the company, the reputation of the company, the profitability of the company. These were very big decisions. How would that person feel if they knew that when they were making these important decisions, they didn't have access to all the necessary data? And we thought, well, that's probably going to make them anxious or nervous or give them second thoughts. And so we proposed a campaign that said this particular product was like an antacid for a diet of tough decisions. So you get that horrible feeling in your stomach when I don't know if I made the right choice. Or we said it was like the delete button for the voice in your head, because we know that when you make a decision but you're not certain, you keep revisiting it. Did I make the right choice? What if? Should I have done? So we led with a very emotional, very empathetic approach. And then, of course, we still had the rational sales points. And when we tested both of the approaches, the very straightforward problem solution and the more empathetic, emotional one, the client found that they got a 13% increase in purchase intent with the more emotional approach. So when people say to me, emotion doesn't work, or I'm not emotional, or my customers aren't emotional, I always say, okay, why don't we test it? You have your opinion, I have my opinion, but let's let the market tell us. And, honestly, sometimes when we test, I get a good response. And sometimes when we test, I get surprised too. It happens. But very often, we see that the emotion works. And when we put the marketing message in the marketplace, that's when we get the answer. When we can test, then we find out what's going to work for that particular product at that particular time with that particular audience.
Yes, that's right. And sometimes even I know neuromarketing strategies. When I am in the shop and I see this strategy, I still wanted to buy it. So it's a big influence of our emotions. And continue on this topic. The brain naturally trends to avoid discomfort rather than seek additional pleasures. Do you know of any exceptions of this rule? When does it work the other way around?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So we have a tendency to move away from pain and towards pleasure. And would there be a time when that might be different? I don't know of any examples where that's the case. Certainly we do move towards pleasure, so people like that. They like to save money. They like to indulge. They like to enjoy themselves. So that is a big motivator. But when you put that up against the idea of some kind of loss due to pain, right? The pain of loss, the tests that I have seen show that the pain of loss is going to outperform the pleasure of gain. There was one pretty well-known experiment, I think, where people were told that they could save a certain amount of money if they insulated their homes, or they would lose a certain amount of money if they failed to insulate their homes. And given the two choices, the one that outpolled by, I think, 50% was the idea that you would lose money if you did not insulate your home. And a colleague of mine actually ran his own test in the market.
Oh.
And he had a client that was doing ISO certification, which is a special certification that you get in the corporate world. And he tested ISO certification, will your company pass, which is exactly what they were selling, the ability to have this and to pass the certification. ISO certification, will your company pass, against ISO certification, will your company fail? And he found that will your company fail, that line is what got him the most response. So We seem to be from an evolutionary standpoint, really hardwired to avoid the pain of loss.
Yeah, that's true.
I have next question, and
maybe before you ask, so it means that we have really, really strong argument to say that we don't have so much other rules, right? So we can have strong argument to say that really how brain provide us to make decisions.
Yeah, yes, I think that is very true. We just make these decisions almost automatically or instinctively or reflexively because of the way our brains are hardwired. We don't really stop to think. If you ask somebody, they might give you a very different opinion about why they do what they do. But it turns out that there are these, other factors at play that influence us, and sometimes we're not aware of them. It's really how our brain is wired.
Yes. Okay, Tomek?
Yes, I have one more question about emotions, but because we buy things in different circumstances. And the question is, do behavioral insights suggest that there's a significant difference between how we make decisions when buying for ourselves versus in a B2B setting? Many believe that professional buyers are immune to emotional influence. What's your take on that?
Thomas, that's a very good question. And we hear that a lot. Well, okay, fine. Emotion is good if you're selling family vacations or wedding photography, something that's, basically emotional, has a lot of emotion in it. But in business to business, people make decisions for the good of the company. It's very thoughtful, very considered, very rational. And there is an element of truth to that. Part of that is true, but it's not entirely true. Because even in a B2B environment, people's emotions still factor in what's good for me as a person, as opposed to what's good for me as an employee factors in. So if I have to make a decision, if I'm buying some new software for my company, well, of course, I want the software to be good for the company, but I also want to make sure that it's not very difficult for me to get people to start using it. I want to make sure that if I say, yes, let's buy this particular software, I'm not stuck there nights and weekends trying to onboard people. I want to make sure that if I say, let's buy this software, my boss isn't going to say to me, oh, Nancy, that's not a good choice. Why? They're not a market leader. Why did you choose them? And I lose, standing at the company. So what people are feeling influences even their business decisions, because I, as a person, I want to make sure that I'm not, that I'm going to look good to my boss, that I'm not putting my standing at work at risk because of a decision I've made. And sometimes if it seems like it's going to be a little riskier, I'll just avoid making that decision and I'll go with something else that's fine. It's good, but I don't want to risk my personal emotions. I don't want to look bad to my colleagues, to the board, to the boss. I don't want to be stuck there working harder or longer because of the decision I made. So there was a piece of research I read. This was a long time ago. I was working on the Dell computer account, but they found that even if somebody at a company really believed that the product you were selling would benefit their company, even if they believed it was the best choice for their company, if they thought that it would be hard to get approval, they wouldn't try. They wouldn't even bother. So the personal emotions do factor in. It's not that we don't think about what's good for the company. We do, but we also temper that with, all right, how is it going to affect me as a person, as an individual?
Okay, so in this, what you said, I had a new question. I thought that, okay, we have emotions like a human everywhere. But now I think that when we have a big company, we have mix of emotions of many people, and how we can, use this knowledge to influence of them.
That's a great question, Carolina. I think what we do, or what would be helpful to do, is we look at each person along the purchase continuum. So, who's going to be who's going to be our first contact, who might be the one who maybe puts us on the list as a company to consider, and what's important to them, and what do they care about. And then we move further on. Now, who's going to be the one who approves this, and what's important to them? And so we message according to what they might be feeling, what's important to them. And then all the way up to the final decision maker who says, yes, spend the money, or don't spend the money. And we think about what's going to be important to them. So there are going to be different influencers and decision makers along the way. And each influencer and each decision maker is going to have their own thing that they're interested about, that they're interested in or focused on. And we want to think about that and serve up our messages accordingly. And so, for example, the email or the ad that we send to one person at the very beginning to get on the consideration list would be very different than the one we are sending towards the end when it's down to us and a competitor and we're trying to close the deal. But we think about what each person has on their mind at the time and what's the best way to message against it.
Okay, thanks.
I think that you have right. In B2B setting also, there are a lot of emotion which influence our decisions. But people, I think it's really hard that someone assume that the emotion influence our decision. We like to think about ourselves that we are, that we calculate everything and we can put emotion on one side, and we have always a really good decisions based on the data, not on emotion.
So I think what we're after is really that mix, that ideal mix of emotional and rational, because if we're all emotion, well, that's not going to provide what we need. And if we're all rational, that also doesn't provide what we need. But if we have that mix, we know that people make a decision for emotional reasons, but they quickly justify the decision by pointing to those rational reasons. So they may tell themselves, they may tell other people that the reason they made the choice is because of these rational reasons. But what really prompted it initially was the emotional response that they had. There's some research that shows up to 80% of decision-making happens in the emotional part of the brain. So we want that emotion, but we also know that people quickly justify those emotional decisions with rational reasons. So we want that balance of the emotional and the rational. Like, I don't really look at it as just one against just the other. I look at it as a combination.
Okay. And I have the important for me question. On every day, I help people to boost their sales on Allegro. Allegro is a Polish marketplace. It's like Amazon, but it's Polish, so it's much better. But the question is, how can a brand stand out in a highly competitive marketplace like Amazon or Polish Allegro, where so many offers look so similar at first glance? And the question is if behavioral science can help sellers on such marketplaces.
Yeah, I think there are probably four ways that you can stand out in a situation like Amazon or Allegra. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yes.
Okay. Where everything is, you're right, very similar. But one thing a marketer can do is try to tap into the von Restorff effect, which is, this idea that things that are different from their surroundings stand out. So here we're in a situation where everything looks very similar. So how can we make what we're selling a little different? How can we make it stand out? And it could be maybe the colors that we use. It could be the angle that we photograph the product from. So it's a different, unusual angle. It could be the naming of the product or the naming of the company. So it's unusual and it stands out. It could be the description that we use. So that's one way. Another way is to engage surprise. Researchers at the University of Glasgow found that when people are surprised, it intensifies their emotions by about 400%. And when you're surprised, it means that you focus more on the thing that surprised you and you remember it longer. So anything we can do in an ad like that to surprise people, and it could be It could be what we're showing, or it could be what we're saying. It could be the price that we use. But anything that we can do to surprise people can be helpful. And the third of the 4 ideas I would suggest is the language that we use. We know that there are certain words that automatically attract the eye. So when people are looking at all their different options and they all look similar, they're skimming, they're scanning, but some words will jump up off the screen and pull the eye in like a magnet. And so those are words that we want to work into our headlines or our brief descriptions. And they would be words like new or finally or limited or guarantee or popular, because these are things that people look for. We're all hardwired to seek out the new and novel. So when we see the word new or a similar word like introducing, announcing, finally, soon, right away our eyes go to that because we are always looking for something that's new or different. The idea of limited, we overvalue things that are scarce. So if something is limited, that will attract our attention. Guarantee can be very reassuring because we don't like to make a mistake. We talked about the pain of loss, right? And if you have a guarantee, that protects you from that pain of loss. So people's eyes gravitate towards that. And then the idea of popular, we all like to feel that we're making a good choice. And if it's a popular choice, if a lot of other people are making it, we feel like we're in good company. We feel it's safe. And we also feel that we're not missing out on something. If it's popular, well, if I don't purchase that, I might be missing something, and I don't want that. I don't like that pain of loss. So language like that can be very, very important. And, literally one word can make that difference. And then the last thing I would suggest is if you're going to be showing people interacting with the product, using the product, wearing the product, demonstrating the product, anytime we can have faces, the human eye is drawn to faces. And not just faces, but particularly to other people's eyes. So if you can have pictures of people where they're looking out at the viewer or at the potential customer, the person who's watching the video, who's looking at the ad, that can be very, very helpful because we're drawn to other people's faces, particularly their eyes. So instead of having someone look at the product, have them look out at the viewer because that will pull the viewer into the ad. So those are, I think, 4 ways that we can adjust our ads to give them a little bit more of an advantage to help make them stand out against all the other very similar sellers in the marketplace.
Okay, you tell that it's good sometimes to surprise customers, but do you have an example how the seller can surprise their customers?
So I think it depends on the particular product, but it could be the way you photograph it, maybe in a very different way against a different background, just in a way that everyone else doesn't. So you're like, oh, well, that stands out. That surprised me. It could be the offer that you make. You might be surprised that the price is what it is, or you might be surprised that the materials were sourced where they were sourced, or you might be surprised how long it took to create a product, and maybe that gets mentioned. But just some little fact that people didn't maybe know about, and you mentioned that, and that can be surprising. So sometimes it could be, what you're looking at the picture. Sometimes it could be something about the product that people wouldn't expect. Sometimes it can be the language that we use. Maybe we word something in a way that makes people take a second look. Like, what did they just say? What was that about? Maybe we deliberately use an exaggerated spelling of a word. Maybe we want to say something is great, but instead of spelling it Great, great, we spell it Greeeeeat. It's great. And, you're not used to seeing that. And so that would make that ad stand out from everyone else's ad that says, our product is great, our product is great, our product is great. So there are inventive ways in that very small piece of real estate that you have, because the ads aren't really big, but in that small amount of selling space that you have, there are ways to do things that could be surprising.
Okay, thank you very much. I will try it with my customers from tomorrow. Probably at first I will surprise my own customer that I want to change everything on their offer. But I have another question. You write about the scarcity principle, which seems tricky in a world of abundance where nearly everything is always available online. How do marketers create a real sense of scarcity today?
Yes, and that's an important point, actually, because what we don't want to do is we don't want to say something is scarce when it turns out it is abundant, because that erodes trust. People aren't, they'll eventually not believe us. And you're right, we are living in a world of abundance, and it's not often that there are scarce products. Certainly when there are, we want to mention it. If something is about to sell out, that's a great time to use scarcity to mention to people, this is selling out, or to say to people, this sold out in the past, because people think, oh, then it might sell out again. Or to say that you're expecting it to sell out. That's another way. It hasn't sold out yet. You still have plenty, but you expect that it will sell out. That can trigger the idea of scarcity. The other thing you can do is if you're having a sale, it could be for a limited time. So there's some scarcity there. Or maybe you give something extra, a bonus, a guidebook, a little bit more to the first 100 people that buy, or the first 50 people that buy. So there's a way to introduce scarcity. You still have an abundant amount of the product, but only the first few are going to get this something extra. The other thing you can consider is having a limited edition version. Maybe you collaborate with another creator or with another brand, and so you have this version that's it's a limited one. It's the only, you're only going to make a certain number of these that have this partnership with the collaborator, or that have, I don't know, it's got the platinum color to it, and there's only so many of them in platinum, and all the rest are gold or silver. But so the idea of a limited edition could trigger that idea of scarcity.
Thank you. Really great examples for you for that.
Yes. I think that this, for sure, I like the most this bonus for, I don't know, first 50 people who buy it. And I have a question about storytelling. Storytelling is often seen as a powerful sales tool, but many sellers or ordinary business hesitate to use it. What would you say to someone who thinks their product or brand isn't interesting enough to tell a story about?
Well, what I would say is the story isn't really about the product or the company. The story should be about the customer and how the customer achieves something or succeeds because of the product, because that's where the real interest is. People aren't interested in what a marketer wants to say. They're interested more in how the marketer can help them. So if you're going to tell a story in your advertising, it shouldn't be about the product or the company. It should be about the customer and how that customer was able to make more money, or make their life easier, or save time, or become more popular, or whatever it is, because of the product. Stories they're engaging, they're involving, they're how information was passed from generation to generation to generation before the written word. So our brains really are hardwired to seek out stories. Stories help us understand things. They help us make sense of the world. And stories are also very memorable. And the wonderful thing about a story is a story allows you to make that emotional connection with your reader or your viewer, your customer, your prospect. You can make that emotional connection, and you can actually take what's in your head, the idea that's in your head, and plant it in their head. And that is amazing. The fact that storytelling allows you to do that. But when you're telling a story, the listener and the marketer end up on the same wavelength. And what happens is the listener to the story starts to feel everything that the main character in the story is feeling. It's behavioral scientists call it narrative transport, but you start to feel what the main character is feeling. So if the main character has just become, rich and famous, you're going to feel that excitement. If the main character has just solved a problem, you're going to feel that relief. And so as a marketer, it's a wonderful way to get people to feel about your product what you want them to feel about the product. But the key, of course, is, again, to make the story about another customer and how the product played a role in that customer's success. And I think when you use a story that way, it can be very, very effective. If you just want to tell the story about the product and the company and how long we've been in business and who runs it, that's not as interesting to people. But how another person has used the product in a way that's been helpful, that is interesting.
Okay, in this case, I have second question. In the marketplace, we have products for many people. Sometimes we have a product which you can use in really, really different ways. And last time we thought about story. Okay, we can create some story for our customers. But then was the question, okay, but people can use this product in many ways. And my question is, what do you think? It's better to prepare a story where this person in the story used this product in some different ways? Or maybe it's better to prepare 3 different stories when any person used this product in any way? What do you think? What is better?
Yeah, it might be good to try to have a story for each type of customer.
Mm-hmm.
And so that way people can, self-select. They see themselves in the story. And with stories, the more specifics that you have, the more believable, the more credible you sound. So if instead of trying to put too many into one, you have 3 different ones for 3 different kinds of customers,
Mm-hmm.
I think that could be a very good approach. As I said earlier, it's always good to test, and you'll find out exactly what works for your product at that time and in that market. But if I had to guess, I would say the 3 different ones would be a good approach.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
I think I finally understood how storytelling works. It's so simple. It's all about our clients.
Yeah.
Okay. I have another question, and maybe also something will be more clear for me. One of your chapters covers the information gap theory, which reminds me of a great public speakers who use it effectively. How can marketers apply this theory in a way that draws people in, especially in digital content or advertising?
Yeah, so information gap theory is this idea that if there's a gap between what you already know and what you would like to know, you take action to close the gap. And we're in marketing, we want people to take action. So using information gap theory could be a good way to do that, to get them to read our content, to get them to buy our product, to get them to find out more. And a good way to use information gap theory is what I call the 5 W's and the 1 H. So in English, the 5 W's and the 1 H are who, what, where, when, why, and how. Because if you pose a question, where do you find the best silver earrings? Why are so many people buying these silver earrings? What makes these silver earrings so different, right? When you pose these questions, people are like, oh, I don't know. I'm interested in silver earrings, but I don't know what makes these so good or why so many people are buying these or how they're, made differently. I want to find out. So using who, what, where, when, why, how, or certain superlatives, the best, the most, the worst, the least, that makes people curious. Another way to describe information gap is to call it curiosity gap. But the idea is you're going to say something that gets people curious. Like, oh, I am kind of interested in this product, but I don't know so much about it that I can answer these questions, and I now want those answers. And so that's a good way. So sometimes posing a question is another good way to pull people in. It's a good way to use information gap theory. You just want to, highlight a gap in what somebody knows, and that will be enough to get them to read a little further or to click the button or to make the purchase so they can find out and satisfy their curiosity and gain that knowledge that they're looking for.
Really surprising for me. But sometimes, maybe often, behavioral science reveals surprising insights about what works in communication. Have you ever come across a finding that challenge your own assumption about what influences people?
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of times when I'm studying this and reading more about it, I think, oh, yeah, that does make sense. Or, oh, that's why that works. We tested our way into it and now I know why it works. But every once in a while, I will read something and I'll think, really? I had no idea. And one thing that's a good example of that is the BYAF technique. The letters BYAF, they stand for but you are free. And what behavioral scientists have found is you can tell someone what you want them to do, you can ask them to do it, but then if you follow that request with a phrase like, but you are free to choose, or the choice is yours, or it's up to you, or, your call, your decision, it actually can on average double the likelihood that people will do what you want them to do. And when I first read that, I thought, that's odd because we've just built our marketing case. We've created this very powerful, persuasive ad. We have our strong call to action. We've got people right where we want them. They're just about to buy, hopefully. Why would we then say, but you know what, Carolina, it's up to you. You know what, Thomas? You're free to choose. In other words, you don't have to if you don't want to. And why would I say that when you're just about, I hope, to buy? Why would I say, but you don't have to? But what it does is it triggers what behavioral scientists call autonomy bias. And we all have this deep-seated desire to feel like we're in charge, that we're not being forced or pushed into doing something. And what the behavioral science behind the BYF technique has found is when you remind people, but you're free to choose, but the choice is yours, it just reminds them that they're making the decision on their own, that they're coming to the decision of their own volition and they're not being forced into it. And it makes them more comfortable about saying yes. And when I first read that, I thought, I don't know, that I'm surprised. That really surprises me. But then when I read more about it, I understood exactly how that would work, and it does make sense. But when I first read it, I was like, oh, no, that sounds like a bad move. But it turns out to be a good move.
Thank you so much. And we have questions about emotions, techniques. So now, of course, we have to ask about budget. Many online sellers don't have a big budget for advertising or general, and how they can start using these strategies in their business, which you show. What kind of ways do you recommend for them? Should they start only with proven strategies prepared by universities or the other companies? Or maybe the eye tracking, surveys, or the EEG is a cheaper way to them full of the neuroscience tests?
Yeah, that's a very good question. The budget is always a problem. And so I would say, listen to your podcast, get everything that you're sharing with your guest, and, pick one or two things listening to the podcast and say, I'm going to test that. I'm going to try that language, or I'm going to try that visual approach, or I'm going to frame my message in that way. There are great books out there. Mine is using behavioral science and marketing, but there are many others. Robert Cialdini's books and Dan Ariely's books. So get the book, read the book, and as you're reading it, think about what it is that you're selling and marketing and how you might apply these things. Eye tracking is wonderful because sometimes we think we have designed the perfect ad or the perfect website or the perfect landing page, and then when we look at the eye tracking, we realize that we added something to that layout that we didn't realize was going to be distracting, or that we didn't realize was going to be confusing. And eye tracking can really help us identify that. And you can generally get a eye tracking study for not a huge amount of money. And then the other kind of research that can be very important, and again is about the cost maybe of a focus group these days, is the implicit response times. So what the researcher does is they expose the research candidate, the research subject, to different stimuli, to different language, different words or different pictures, and they ask them to quickly decide, yes or no, or good or bad, or like or don't like. And they measure how quickly someone makes the decision. And when somebody hesitates, when it takes them a little bit longer, they're not as confident. And so that can be very valuable in terms of deciding whether or not somebody understands something, and in terms of deciding whether or not something is appealing. So there's some interesting work being done in that area too. And these days it can be done online. It doesn't even have to be done in person. You can get into some very sophisticated neuromarketing research where people have to be connected to different machines, and and that can get a little bit expensive, and it can be cumbersome. But these days there are some things that can be done online where the research is easily accessible and not all that expensive. So depending on how much budget somebody has, they can do something as simple as listen to the podcast and pull an idea out and test it, or read one of these books and get some ideas and test those, all the way up to some relatively inexpensive eye tracking or implicit response time tracking or testing, I should say, that will really yield a lot of very valuable information and help you make sure that the message you're putting out in the marketplace is going to be very effective before you spend a lot of money on the media.
That's true. And sometimes we think, okay, survey does enough, but we know that sometimes people put on the surveys the different answer that they really think, or their emotions provide to do something different that they shows in the surveys.
You're absolutely right. Surveys can be helpful, but we always have to remember that what somebody says may not really be the answer. Not that they're trying to lie to us, but they may not even realize that what they're saying isn't the whole answer, isn't the whole truth. And so you're absolutely right. We do have to be careful with the surveys.
Yes. So of course, when we don't have budget, we can use it at the beginning, but it's good to know to learn more about behavior and about making decision by our brain.
Absolutely. And sometimes just testing, when we let the market tell us, not tell us, but literally respond to us. And that informs, it informs us, and we're like, okay, that one works better than this one, this language, this picture, this product works better than this other one. And that can be very valuable learning, because the market is letting us know, by voting with their pocketbook, by voting with their wallet, what they like.
Yes.
Nancy, you mentioned this person at least twice during our interview, and your book includes many principles made famous by Robert Cialdini. His influence on marketing is undeniable, but I wonder, do you think any of his original principles have lost some of their power over time? And is there one that still delivers the most value for sellers?
So it's funny. He just republished or reissued a revised edition of Influence, the Psychology of Persuasion. I think it's the 50-year anniversary, and it maintains all of his original principles, but provides additional information. So I do think that Cialdini's original 6, now I believe he has 7 principles of influence, still apply. That said, I think some may be stronger than others. Some may be a little less effective. Social proof is very powerful. When we're not sure of what to do, we look to others, we follow their lead. So we look at the number of stars on a rating. We look at the number of a product that was sold. We read the reviews. So I think we've gotten very used to that. I don't know if it's necessarily less effective, but we have gotten used to it. Then there's something like scarcity, where if there's a limited number of something, we go, oh, I better get it now. And we talked earlier about scarcity, and it's hard to create it when there's such abundance. But sometimes I think marketers try to manipulate things, and they'll say, oh, there's only 3 left. And we find out that there's 3,000 left, but they said there were 3 left. And, when that happens, people start to get a little skeptical. And when a marketer misuses that and the word gets out, it makes people skeptical. So even when an ethical marketer says there's only 3 left, there's a little bit of skepticism. So I think that, that principle has come under a little scrutiny. There's a little bit more, I'm not sure I should believe that from customers. Loss aversion, which we talked about earlier, I think that remains a very strong and very compelling motivator of behavior, because we just don't like to lose out. I know myself, I've written the book Using Behavioral Science in Marketing. I study, behavioral science. I'm a marketer. I know these principles. And even I will find myself thinking, oh, I don't want to miss out on this. I'm not entirely sure if what they're telling me is true, but just in case it is, I'd better get mine now. I don't want to miss out. So it's so hardwired into us. So I think of his principles, loss aversion is a very, that's a very strong, compelling motivator. But I think basically his work stands the test of time. I really do.
Yes. And I have my own question. It's just, I'm really interested in your opinion about the area. From a few years, we heard about growing up the AI tools, possibilities of popularizing BCI technology, etc. What is your opinion about it, about the solutions, about BCI technology, connected brain, computer, chip, etc.?
So I will say, first of all, this is just my opinion, and perhaps more importantly, I am not an expert in this area. I don't know a lot about it. My opinion is the technology is advancing so rapidly that it wouldn't surprise me if a year from now things are very different than they are right now. It wouldn't surprise me if we have incredible advances in what we can do using artificial intelligence. I know that there are some dangers. I know that we worry about certain built-in biases. I know we worry sometimes about hallucinations or fabrications, but things are changing so quickly. And I believe that what we're going to be able to do using artificial intelligence maybe hasn't even been thought of yet today. Where we are right now is only, I believe, scratching the surface. So, do I think that artificial intelligence is the answer with no humans at the moment? No. But do I think that we're going to make great strides in the area and unlock possibilities that we don't even imagine right now? Probably.
Okay, I wanted to interested because I know the USA is more technology than us, but AI it's something that it's everywhere right now. But of course, thank you for your opinion, because I think the same. For sure, in my opinion, it can be dangerous, but not now. But I think that we have to be we have to know more about the solutions. For example, about BCI, because now, for example, when we have Neuralink, it's a chip created by Elon Musk company. It's dedicated just for people who are sick and they need help, right? But I heard opinions and possibilities that they want to popularizing this technology, but it's just a speculation, so we can see how it will for a few years.
Yes, it definitely remains to be seen, and I don't know enough about it to say one way or another. But things are definitely changing quickly.
Yes. From my side, Nancy, thank you. I don't know, Tomek, do you have any questions more?
Nancy, thank you very much for joining our podcast, to be our guest on our podcast. It's really good conversation with you. And your book, Using Behavioral Science in Marketing, I think it should be published in Poland. Really, it's so good. It gives simple and straightforward solution for many marketers or sellers. It's really also provided in a simple way that you can read it and implement on the other day in your company. So thank you for your book.
Thank you very much for those kind words about my book, and also for having me on your podcast. It's been delightful speaking with you both. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's all for today. Thank you for your time, and we hope our podcast was very interesting and helpful for you.
If you enjoyed our show, please subscribe to our podcast and be sure to join our Facebook group.
Listen to you in the next episode.